who does that? Who would pray? No one, except the Christians, and they do. They're commanded to. So if you're hassling that group, maybe you've got another agenda that we should be concerned about, even if we're not in that group. If we burn 90 of their churches to the ground, and the prime minister and his little weird buddies are endorsing that, burning churches, if you're on the side of burning churches, let me just say, I don't need any other facts of the case, you're on the wrong side.
Tucker Carlson has always been a polarizing figure, especially when it comes to his views on religion, politics, and society. In his recent speeches, he directed strong criticism towards the Canadian government, accusing it of fascism under the guise of public safety. His comments, particularly about how Christians are being treated in Canada, have sparked significant controversy and discussion. In this video, we will take a look at that broader conversation about religious freedom, governmental authority, and societal values. He argues that Christians are being targeted by the Canadian government through various laws and policies that, in his view, undermine religious freedom and promote a secular agenda. This perspective is rooted in his deep concern for the future of Christian values in an increasingly secular world. Carlson's speeches in Calgary and Edmonton, Alberta in particular, have drawn attention for their harsh criticism of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and other political leaders. He accused them of pushing hard-edge fascism under the pretext of public safety. Carlson's use of the term fascism is intended to convey his belief that the government is overstepping its bounds and infringing on individual freedoms, particularly those of Christians. One of the key issues Carlson raised was the decriminalization of small quantities of certain drugs in British Columbia. This policy, which allows individuals to possess up to 2.5 grams of drugs like heroin, meth, and ecstasy for personal use, is part of a 3-year pilot program aimed at addressing the rising number of drug overdose deaths. Carlson criticized this approach, arguing that it is a clear example of the government prioritizing harmful policies over the well-being of its citizens. He expressed disbelief that such a policy could be considered a form of public safety, calling it the darkest thing I can imagine. Carlson also addressed Bill C-4, an anti-conversion therapy law that was passed in Canada without a single dissenting vote. Conversion therapy, as defined by the bill, refers to any practice aimed at changing an individual's sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. The bill criminalizes these practices, framing them as harmful and based on outdated stereotypes. Carlson sees this law as a direct attack on Christian beliefs about human sexuality, arguing that it criminalizes the preaching and teaching of the biblical view on these matters. According to Carlson, the unanimous passage of Bill C-4 is indicative of a broader trend in Canada towards rejecting traditional Christian values in favor of a secular, progressive agenda. He pointed out that not a single member of Canada's House of Commons voted to defend the biblical ethic of sexuality, which he sees as a troubling sign of the direction the country is headed. For Carlson, this represents a clear rejection of God's moral law and an embrace of a secular worldview that is at odds with Christian teachings. The broader context of Carlson's criticism is the ongoing cultural and social changes in Canada and other Western countries. He argues that these changes are part of a deliberate effort to undermine Christian values and promote a secular, humanistic agenda. Carlson traces this trend back to the sexual revolution of the 1960s and 1970s, which he sees as a pivotal moment in the rejection of traditional Christian morality. He believes that the sexual revolution set the stage for the current cultural climate in which Christian values are increasingly marginalized and under attack. Carlson is particularly concerned about the impact of these changes on the institution of marriage and the family. He argues that the acceptance of homosexuality, the rejection of monogamy, and the devaluation of marriage as a sacred institution have all contributed to the breakdown of the family unit. According to Carlson, the family is the foundation of a healthy society, and its erosion has serious consequences for the nation as a whole. In his speeches, Carlson shows the importance of resisting these cultural changes and defending Christian values. He called on Christians to wake up and recognize the seriousness of the situation. warning that the continued erosion of Christian values will have devastating consequences for society. Carlson believes that the current state of affairs is a direct result of a long series of choices made by society to reject God and his moral law. Carlson's message is clear. Christians must take a stand against the secularization of society and the erosion of traditional values. He argues that the government and other institutions are actively promoting ideologies that are in direct opposition to Christian teachings, and that Christians must resist these efforts in order to protect their faith and their way of life. One of the most controversial aspects of Carlson's speeches was his discussion of the role of the state in education. He argued that public schools have become breeding grounds for new gender ideologies that ignore basic human biology and promote confusion among young people. Carlson is particularly concerned about the teaching of these ideologies in sexual education programs, which he believes are designed to indoctrinate children into a secular, humanistic worldview. Carlson also addressed the issue of how the state defines and regulates family structures. He argued that the state has taken it upon itself to redefine the family in ways that are inconsistent with Christian teachings. For example, Carlson pointed out that it is increasingly rare for children to be raised in a family with both of their biological parents, and that the state has made it easier for marriages to be dissolved. He sees these developments as part of a broader effort to undermine the traditional family and replace it with a more fluid and less stable model. In his view, the state's attempts to redefine gender and family structures are part of a larger agenda to separate individuals from their biological and spiritual identities. Carlson argues that this agenda is driven by a desire to replace God's design for human beings with a secular, humanistic alternative. He believes that this effort is ultimately harmful to individuals and to society as a whole. Carlson's criticism of the Canadian government extends beyond its policies on gender and sexuality. He also accused the government of persecuting Christians, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic. He pointed to the arrests of Christian pastors who defied lockdown orders as evidence of the government's hostility towards Christianity. Carlson argued that these arrests were part of a broader effort to silence Christians and prevent them from preaching the gospel. He urged them to put their trust in God and to focus on living according to His will. Carlson quoted the Bible to emphasize this point, citing 2 Chronicles 7:14, which calls on believers to humble themselves, pray, and seek God's face in order to receive His forgiveness and healing. Carlson also warned that the current cultural climate is not true liberation, but rather an attack on God's nature and His Word. He argued that the promotion of secular ideologies is a scheme of the devil designed to kill, steal, and destroy. Carlson believes that these ideologies are intended to lead people away from God and towards spiritual destruction. Throughout his speeches, Carlson emphasized the importance of understanding the spiritual dimension of the current cultural and political landscape. He argued that the challenges facing Christians today are not just political or social, but spiritual in nature. Carlson believes that the ultimate battle is between the kingdom of God and the forces of darkness, and that Christians must be prepared to stand firm in their faith. Carlson concluded his speeches by urging his audience to take a closer look at what is happening to Christians in Canada and to recognize the seriousness of the situation. He pointed out that over 90 churches in Canada have been burned or vandalized in recent years, and that the response from the government has been lukewarm at best. Carlson argued that this is indicative of a broader societal trend towards hostility and violence against Christians. In his view, the burning of churches is just one example of how Christians are being targeted and persecuted in Canada. Carlson believes that this persecution is part of a larger effort to marginalize and silence Christians, and that it is being carried out with the tacit approval of the government. He warned that this trend is likely to continue unless Christians take a stand and defend their faith. He also addressed the issue of hypocrisy within the government and other institutions. He argued that those who promote secular ideologies often do so under the guise of neutrality or public safety, but that their true intentions are far more sinister. However, Carlson's views have also been met with strong opposition, particularly from those who believe that his rhetoric is divisive and inflammatory. Critics argue that Carlson's speeches are based on fear-mongering and misinformation, and that his accusations of fascism and persecution are exaggerated and unhelpful. Despite the controversy surrounding his views, Carlson remains a prominent voice in the conversation about religion, politics, and society. His speeches reflect a deep concern for the future of Christian values in an increasingly secular world, and a determination to defend those values against what he sees as a concerted effort to undermine them. For Carlson, the ultimate goal is not just to resist the cultural changes taking place in Canada and other Western countries, but to bring about a revival of Christian values. He believes that this revival is the only way to counter the secular ideologies that are currently dominant and to restore society to a foundation based on God's moral law. So, what do you think about this? Comment down your thoughts right now, and while you're down there, make sure to hit that subscribe button as well.